What's up, friends? Robin back here. This is called Cage Talk. What is it? Well, Dark Side of the Cage is a series on Vice that looks deeply into some characters and stories in the world of mixed martial arts. Deeper Into the Cage is a podcast that we do as shoulder program, as a little add-on, as some extra layers peeled for Dark Side of the Cage. This is the full-length interviews of all of the chats that we do for that. Does that make sense to you? Makes sense to me. Makes sense to me. Today, we chat with Greg Jackson in its entirety about Diego Sanchez. We get together with David Mullins, a sports psychology consultant, and we use Diego Sanchez kind of as a leaping off point to examine cults and gurus and things as they relate to high performers. And we hang out with Mike Goldberg. If you've heard people talking during UFC fights, he's the most memorable voice ever, and he's an awesome cat. So today, Diego Sanchez. Make sure you check out Dark Side of the Cage on Vice. Episode 2 is Diego Sanchez, the fighter and the guru, and this is Cage Talk. Greg, good to see you, man. How are you?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah. How's the world of coaching elite, super dangerous athletes?
I pinch myself every morning why they want this ugly mug in their corner. I'll never know, but I'm grateful they do. That's for sure.
Isn't it an incredible thing to do what you love every day?
I am so blessed and it's so lucky. And yeah, every day I just about kiss the ground because a guy like me, I have no other skills, right? It's fighting or I work at McDonald's. That's all I got.
You and me are very similar in that way and others, sir. Um, so let's talk about Diego. When it came time that we were going to do an episode on Diego, he was somebody I really wanted to dig into early because he's special, right? He's one of a kind.
Very much so. He was always unique too. That's the thing about that kid is, well, he's not a kid anymore. Good Lord. But he was always unique. He was always something special. He was always different than the rest. He's definitely an independent artist, so to speak.
And he's very much he's an athlete and he's a fighter, no question. But he's very much an artist, as some people would say kindly, like a weirdo artist.
Yeah, for sure. Like an eccentric. I would.
Eccentric.
There you go. There's a good political word for us. He's an eccentric artist for sure.
And so let's talk first about when you first met him. Was he was there something special about him as a combat artist? Like, was he better than other people? Was he more skilled in some areas, or was it a spirit thing?
I think so. I think he had an incredible self-possessed self-belief, if that makes any sense. Like he knew he was going to be something good and wanted to show everybody. And he was extremely talented, but really early on it was his work ethic. That kid was always in the gym, every single class, every single workout. He never missed it. So he was just obsessed. And I think that's what really paid off for him is that obsession that the kind of the reality is I'm going to have to work harder than everybody else, even though I am talented, sunk on him pretty early.
I don't know if this is a true, true in the world of animals or metaphorically, just a metaphor, but are there horses that if you don't stop them from running, they'll run until they die? Is that true?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but that would be definitely Diego. If Diego was a horse, that would be him for sure. Yeah, he was just, at that time in his life, it was all or nothing, and he was all in.
The first time I came to your gym, Greg, I was there to interview Cub, and I spoke with you, and I looked over, I'd never met Diego at the time, and he was standing on some weird metal contraption that had like some weird kinds of balance thing, and he was standing there with his arms up and his head up in the air, and when he finished to go do something, and he was training hard and almost possessed. And I said, Diego, what is that thing? And he said, Robin, if I took the time to tell you what that was, it would take me all day. And then he ran off to do something. And it just looked like junk to me. Does that sound right?
Yeah, he always had a contraption, a new thing, a new, like, something that was going to stretch his spine and his brain. And yeah, there's always something new with Diego. He's very entertaining. He's got a heart of gold on him. He's a sweet, sweet guy, but incredibly entertaining just for that reason. He went running one time with these giant spring boots in the mountains, and you never knew what you were going to get with him. And it definitely made life more interesting.
Wait, spring boots, like The modern kind or like the old cartoon kind?
Well, no, I think that they're modern, but it's based. He read something or somebody gave it to him that would help his running, so they're like stilts, but they had springs on them, and he went, yeah, that's my Diego. I love him to death. He's crazy
Yeah.
in the best way.
I wanted to do one of these episodes on Diego because he's eccentric and fascinating, but also because he's so sweet and kind. And I wanted to make sure that people saw that. When his life hasn't gone perfect, there are times, there are adventures in his life that are beautiful and wonderful and inspiring. Then other times there's some difficult periods. These things are all part of the same picture, right? Like somebody who wants to find every detail possible to make him better is the same kind of person who can fall prey to a guru type, right?
Of course, and that Diego was always susceptible to that. Like he really wanted to believe, he really wanted to have absolute answers. Like those were things that were very appealing to him. So I can see him, and it, as I'm sure the documentary showed, it kind of happened over and over again, where these guys would kind of suck him in and take advantage of him, and then he'd learn his lesson and move on. So it that is the downside to his obsessive belief is he was always looking for something new, and sometimes he would get taken advantage of.
Please forgive me if it sounds like I'm correcting you, but you said learn his lesson and move on, but he actually didn't always learn it, right?
And sometimes it takes us one or two. We're all like, well, I don't know if we're all are. I certainly am. Sometimes it takes us a few times to burn our hand on the stove before we're like, okay, no more stove. It might
Yeah.
happen once. At least for me, it does. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed.
You're talking to the same. In one sense, martial arts is a great metaphor for most things in life. In one sense, we're looking for the truth. We're looking for the facts. We're looking for the what is. But in also, often what is not as simple as what is. And if we peel a layer back more, we're not at what is at all. Isn't this a part of the eternal search?
It really is, and that I think it's a noble search, right? But it does have a dark side. If you kind of get caught in the wrong currents of that search, you can definitely spiral into some negative stuff. So, it can happen, and it's certainly like we said, Diego was susceptible to that because the search is a noble thing. We all do it, but yeah, it does have a dark piece to it.
I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, when I approached Diego and said, can we talk about some of these chapters of your life? That for reasons known only to him, he was now willing to talk about them. Has he talked to you a lot about or much about these sort of these meanders that he's gone down rabbit holes searching for weird truths?
Yeah, while he was doing it more than now, but yeah, it's we can all kind of reflect back, and I think it's good that he's open and honest and communicating about it. It might teach other people. People need to appreciate him and all the things that he's been through. I think that's important. And he's also a good cautionary tale of what to do right and what not to do. So I think it's great that he's open and kind of teaching this next generation of fighters. It's not a bed of roses when you get to the top.
You make a fascinating point because it isn't just an extreme like I followed a cult leader or a guru is an extreme, but truthfully, a young fighter, whether it's a manager, whether it's a sponsor, whether it's somebody offering something, whether it's steroids, like there's all kinds of pitfalls for high performers in every field that are just waiting for you.
Absolutely. And the more you know, the more you can avoid, right? Like, and sometimes it's just we're psychologically wired that even if we do know, we can't avoid sometimes. But it's you should have at least some foreknowledge there of a heads up, and that should help. That hopefully that will just information, right? Like, oh, here's what Diego went through. I'm going through something similar. Here's what he did right. Here's what he did wrong. I think is very valuable.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. It's Diego is the kind of guy from my experience that wants to do good and he wants to be a positive influence. And this is a way that he can and does by telling his story, the ups and the downs, the winning and the Ultimate Fighter and ending up hanging upside down with a blindfold on while some weird guy's hitting him, like telling all of it. His story is so one of one.
It really is. It's a fascinating journey he's had. And I hope it turns out well. I hope the rest of his life he can kind of cruise and not have to worry about things. And so, yeah, that's let's hope that it has a happy ending.
Do you see Diego these days, 2025? Is there any likely, do you expect him to walk into the gym and say, I want to train today?
Well, no, but if he does, he'd be more than welcome. But hopefully his training days are behind him and he's on to bigger and better things for himself and his family. But I shouldn't say that. His fighting days, you can train till you're drop, right? Like we all love to train. But yeah, his fighting days should be done, and yeah, it should make some great movies and great stories.
In those early days, was Diego with you? When did Diego come and start training with you? Was that after The Ultimate Fighter? Yeah.
Oh no, no. He was my first guy to win the ultimate. Well, he was the first Ultimate Fighter winner. Period. So no, he was with me way before that. He started with me, so he got right out of high school. So he was like 17, 18. I don't remember exactly, but he basically graduated high school and then came to the gym. So all that first season and all that Ultimate, that was all us.
When Diego told the story, he talked about being a 15, 16-year-old kid wrestling and then seeing jiu-jitsu somewhere on the corner of a wrestling mat. Do you remember? And do you remember his earliest days of going from a kid who liked to wrestle to learning other things?
I don't, unfortunately. Like that's the problem with me being old and probably taking one too many to myself is I don't exactly remember the moment I have more impressions because that was 20 some. What year did he win? 2005?
2005.
Yeah, so it was about 20 years ago ish, 19 years ago. So no, 20 now. So yeah, it's hard to remember specifics as the exactly, but I do remember more of his aura, if you will, like more of what he was, his passion, his excitement, other people teasing him, that's more what I remember than specifically the moment where he came up. Although I'm sure there was one somewhere.
When 20 years a long time, now you're into 3 decades being a coach.
Over 3.
Yeah, wow. Um, how hard is it to try to explain to somebody who's 15 wanting to train mixed martial arts now what it was like in 2000, 2002, 2003? Like, how hard is that to explain?
Well, and even in the early, actually, it was around the Ultimate Fighter. A lot of stuff changed for MMA as far as the money we made and the attention we got. But pre that, so I started, and I think our first competitions were like in '94, '95. So I had already been coaching 10 years before we got to the Ultimate Fighter. I, in the same way that like if you're a woman and you try to tell a guy about childbirth, it's just not gonna, you know what I mean? Like we just don't get it. Like we don't have the experience. We can't. I mean, you could say, "Oh, I have cramps," but that's not really what giving birth is. So there's some things that you can't tell the kids. Like you can say it was tough, it was a struggle, but most of those kids are in a tough struggle right now. So, and I try not to be the guy that's like, in my day,
Yeah.
no gloves, and you just So if they ask, I'll tell them. But most of the time, nobody wants to hear an old guy telling old stories about MMA in the early days. I don't think these guys are on their journey right now, just excited to be a part of it. So if they ask me, I'll tell them, and sometimes I'll bring it up like, I was doing MMA when you were negative 10 years old, or what, just to tease them. But yeah,
It wasn't called that then, and there were that first time that I was in your gym, I was doing a movement class the next day, and Carlos Condit and Cub Swanson were there. And as a martial arts nerd, those are two of my favorite martial artists of all time. And yeah, and as is rare for me, I shut my mouth and I listened to them, and they were chatting, and Carlos somehow brought up his first fight, and he said that it was in a nightclub in Tijuana, to which Cub said, he also fought in Tijuana, and Cub said, nightclub? And I said, well, where was your fight? He said, a chicken coop.
right? Yeah. Oh yeah, it was all fun. Listen, we've been in so many rodeo halls and barns, and you wouldn't believe it. Well, you would. You were there for a lot of it, but yeah, the stuff that the parties that we used to attend, so to speak, were it was pretty full on. Like walking on boards over cow shit to get to the arena. Sorry if we can't cuss on your podcast.
Oh, we can.
Okay, yeah. Good. I just walked over cow manure to get to the cage or ring or whatever it was back in the old days. It was pretty full on.
When that early Ultimate Fighter, Carlos Condit before him, Diego later, we didn't know what we didn't know,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
The idea people would punch and then they'd be wrestling.
Hmm.
The idea that you didn't have to wrestle was just foreign to you. If you punched, next thing you were wrestling. Things like that. What do you think? Do you think that in 20 years, should you be so lucky to get to do what you love every day 20 years from now, that it'll be so different that you'll look back to today and think that we knew very little today?
Probably, but what I've noticed is the arms race continues as it always does. The knowledge does continue, but now it's so much more micro. Back in those days, you remember it was macro. It was really big, like wrestling versus like it was such a giant thing. Now it's half guard against the fence. Like there's a new way. So yeah, I think that it will continue to evolve. I'll be lost in 40 years. I hope. Like I can't wait to be the old guy that like doesn't remember anything. I'm on my way, but it'll be super fun. But I think in between that time, there are going to be more revolutions, more ways to do things, but it's going to be on a smaller scale. I don't think it'll be dramatic. And if you're not educated on the martial arts, I think you might miss it. Like that's how nuanced it'll be as we move into that time. But I think I think there's going to be the continuous evolution that is human combat for sure.
I want to ask you something about Diego. When he was fighting those crazy Carl Parisian and Clay and Gilbert Melendez fights, was passion and ferocity and heart and will more important then than it is now because there were bigger holes in the technique and stuff? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Like what you're saying is, did his passion make up for a kind of a lack of technical thing? And in some ways, I think so. More in his kickboxing, I think, than in his grappling. But yeah, that definitely can carry you sometimes. Like if you're technically deficient there. I never felt Diego out of not able to perform on the ground when he wrestled people. I thought he was always very good. His deficiency for me was always his kickboxing stuff. He actually was doing really well for a while there, and then it kind of slacked off a little bit. But yeah, the that definitely can be a thing. I never felt that on the ground with Diego. I did worry about his kickboxing some though.
Yeah, but there's this strange element that still to this day is sort of present, that ability to kind of make you also sloppy, you know? Like to almost through will and by forcing the situation. And it seems to be more cerebral and emotional than anything, but that ability to force you to be sloppy too.
Absolutely. And I mean, some of the best fighters in the world are able to do that verbally or whatever to kind of get you off your game. Keith Jardine, another person in that era, had a very awkward style that was very hard to kind of get a hang of. And yeah, he would also make people look sloppy just because they couldn't get his timing and his rhythm.
Um, for you, Greg, these days, like when you just kind of find yourself nerding out about something or like looking under something and finding something deeply curious, like give me a few examples of those recently for you as a coach and a martial artist, where things you've just gone down rabbit holes and kind of nerded out.
On martial arts or outside?
Yeah, martial arts.
Well, I'll tell you what, I had a lot of fun in John Jones's last camp working with Gordon Ryan and just watching what he does grappling and stuff was, and John Danaher is a very dear friend of mine. So just watching those guys, their innovations, what they're coming up with was super fun for me. I really learned a lot, and it was a lot of fun to work with him and see what he's doing. And I get that when I work with like Ryan Hall and some of these great jiu-jitsu guys that I'm really fortunate enough to work with. Just seeing what they do, their take on it, their ideas. Ryan Hall has this beautiful thing about shapes and like how you fit those shapes together. And yeah, it's really cool. Like everybody's at a high level, their approach to it has, even if it's this information, I know the way they come at it is so interesting and cool that I'm constantly in that state of like, oh wow, that's really neat. Look what they're doing there. I really enjoy it. So I would say the last time that happened was working with Gordon on John's last fight.
And I think what I'm going to ask you will apply if somebody is a specialist in gardening or being a chef or whatever. But when you see somebody else's model and it's different, like their perspective or the filter through which they see it, it's different. And you start to learn that, do you start to then try to experiment with their filter and their model, or do you just sort of phase it into your overall view of how everything works?
More of an overall thing. Like, you don't want to take credit for other people's work, and I certainly would never want to approach like, oh, look what I came up with, when it was Ryan's or Gordon's or John's or whoever else. I'm very sensitive to that, because it's that can be a very negative thing. So for me, it's much more of like a contribution to my overall understanding of the martial arts, and that's what I'm a curious guy by nature. That's what I love. So I have a lot of fun just seeing what their perspective is, and then bringing my own perspective and kind of melding the two, as good teachers teach you. So yeah, the learning part for me is still super fun. Like, I know what I would do if I couldn't learn. Like, my mom is one of the best people in the world. She said, well, when you die, God answers all your questions. And I always thought as a kid, like, God, that would be miserable for me if I couldn't think about things or try to figure it out, or learn new stuff. So hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully you still get to learn. We'll see.
I don't want to. Sometimes when you ask this question of somebody, it's hard for them to come up with something. But can you just give me one interesting or really unique Diego Sanchez story? Just something that jumps to the front of your mind that is definitively Diego Sanchez.
Like, we used to talk about, when we'd run in the mountains, we would talk about the evolutionary forces that shaped all the animals around us, right? So in New Mexico, in the high desert, we're very high. We're higher than Denver. Everything is tough, right? It's all cactuses and shrubs. There's no like big, beautiful trees. The animals are like rattlesnakes and coyotes. They're super smart, cunning, the rabbits. So we would talk about that. Like, you're kind of channeling that nature in yourself. You're training in the same austere conditions that that created these life forms. And that's cool. Like, you should pay respect to the you tough as well. And then Diego really took that and like was channeling the power from the storms and stuff. I don't know if he's early Ultimate Fighter, but I just love that about him. Like, he really took that idea and ran with it. And one of my favorite Diego stories is just him like wanting the lightning to power him, wanting the storm, that feeling you have, that little danger, that excitement there, just to go. And so that was definitively Diego to me. He took an idea and made it passionate, made it exciting for him, and gave him inspiration. And he used it to help train in his fights. And that to me is what he's about.
Thank you for hanging with me, Greg. I love chatting with you. I miss chatting with you. Let's do it again sooner than later.
Just tell me when, boss. I'm here for you.
Lots of love, my friend. Take care. David Mullins, my friend. How are you, brother?
Yeah, I'm good. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. We've chatted a lot in the past about different aspects of fighters, their mindset, training, all of these kinds of things. With Diego, it gives us an interesting jumping off point to kind of talk about gurus and mystics. And, there's a lot of people in the world of martial arts sometimes who are, bullshit artists and cult leaders and stuff. Not speaking of Diego specifically, because I know you haven't worked with him closely. What does this Diego story of the guru, where does that take you? What are some thoughts?
So, like, we could all see it playing out when it was playing out. And we, as we've all been fans of anyone who's a fight fan is a Diego Sanchez fan. Some of the fights he's been in have been incredible. And we could see it playing out in real time in front of us. This guy it's bullshit. We could all see it. But for whatever reason, Diego couldn't see it in that moment. And he shouldn't feel bad. He's not the only one. Many, many others have been fooled along the way with similar types. I think it speaks, first of all, let's speak about the fighter who can be conned, fooled, tricked, whatever you want to call it. There's certain reasons, certain things that happen, factors that cause that to happen in those moments. So a lot of it is the timing. Right. So maybe Diego of 10 years ago wouldn't have been involved in something like that. So timing in terms of just being more vulnerable now, for whatever reason, there might be a desperation. There might be a stage of a career where things have started to plateau and you're looking for some kind of quick fix, some easy solution, something different. So you're a bit more vulnerable in that timing. That can be a factor. there can be other things around, different things in personal lives that we don't even know about, that could be going on for someone with different relationships, and that just makes certain people more susceptible to falling for some of that stuff. And I do mean falling for it, because that's what you do. You fall into a trap of thinking that this is legit, this is the real deal, this is going to work, and that's what these guru types, and there are many of them, and that was an obvious one, right? We could all see it. We could all see it in real time.
Obvious to
for
us,
me,
not obvious to Diego. Obvious to
not
us,
obvious to
but like
Diego,
you said, but not obvious to Diego.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The thing for me that was interesting is that was so obvious to everyone, but at the same time, there are many others still functioning in this sport that are less obvious to others, that are, in my opinion, just as bad. So, like, for me, I had to do a postgrad, or like an undergrad in psychology, postgrad masters in sport and exercise psychology that took multiple years to complete, to do placements as part of that with individual athletes, with teams. I had to then become accredited with X hours of training to be able to do sports psychology with athletes. Whereas other people just decide they want to do it and they get to do it.
One
There are
day,
no barriers. There are no barriers to entry. That's a problem in this sport. It's a problem in other sports as well, but less so. At the money that's involved in the sport now, compared to when it kicked off not that long ago, it's crazy. And so you are going to attract certain types that want to, profit from that. And the barrier to entry for them, it's basically nil, right? So if I want to become a coach in professional football, I have to do all my badges. I have to get a UEFA license. I have to do all that stuff. There's a clear pathway. I can't get the jobs if I don't have all those accreditations and those licenses. If I want to be a coach in MMA, I just have to call myself an MMA coach, and I get to be an MMA coach if people want me to be their coach. And if I have enough charisma, if I sound like I know what I'm talking about, don't need to know what I'm talking about, I just need to sound like I know what I'm talking about, then I could fool certain people. And that's a problem for me in my side of things with sports psychology, because that, like, the Diego thing was everything. It wasn't just sports psych, it was everything. But in sports psychology in particular, which matters to me, this happens a lot, where there's mental coaches out there. There's, they're in essence, for me, the exact same thing as the Diego situation. It's just people don't realize it. It's not as obvious. And so that to me is a problem in this sport still now. And the victims are the fighters who think they're getting good work done, and they're not. It's one thing financially, they're wasting their money, but they're also wasting parts of their very, very short career, going down the wrong paths, going down the wrong roads, looking for success, looking for quick fixes, looking for magic, and people are willing to sell them that magic. And the cost of time served and put in, and the opportunity cost of what they could have done if they had done different things with that time. It's a problem.
Well, it's also the brain damage business. So if I go into a professional fight with a professional athlete with some belief in something slightly mystical or magical, or something that I believe is a trick of the mind that I can use, I can take permanent, life-changing brain damage. So it is a very, very scary thing for people to be trained by these gurus. And like you said, if I put on a shirt that says coach and walk in and coach somebody, or the idea of saying I'm a mindset coach, it's like a life coach. You can just say you're one, and it doesn't mean that necessarily anything you're doing is rooted in some actionable work.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some of these mind coaches, or whatever you want to call them. They have many different names. They maybe don't even know that they're not legit. because they have been fooled by people who are offering training courses that last a few weekends. You do a few weekends on an online, and now you get some certification that tells you you're some kind of mind coach. So they think they are mind coaches, a lot of them, so it's like there's layers to this. There's levels to the guru side of things. But it's hard. It's hard to regulate it. It really is the nature of the sport. It really is tough to regulate it. It's tough to regulate fighters. It's themselves, never mind all of the different coaches that are involved. So I think martial arts and mixed martial arts is more susceptible to it than other sports, just because of the history there and all that comes with that. But yeah, it exists, and it exists in a deep way that is less obvious, like I said, than the Diego situation was.
Help me if you can, and see if we can make sense of this. But when you're a professional athlete, or an artist, or an entrepreneur, or anyone in life, sometimes you're driven to get better all the time. Part of that path is to find new answers. Is there something about that drive to get better all the time that can make somebody, in this case Diego Sanchez, but any of us, susceptible to being tricked into it? Is there something in that path?
For sure. Like what I'm thinking there, as you're asking that, is there's research on why people join cults, right? And there's certain factors that are kind of common traits for people. One of the main ones is these people want to self-improve. They're looking to improve themselves. That makes them more susceptible to joining cults, to falling for that stuff. And it's not a distant thing between joining a cult and being fooled by certain gurus in mixed martial arts. You can see the connection. You can see why there's certain similarities there. So yes, wanting to improve, wanting to strive to get better, those are good things, of course. Like, everyone should want to do that, but there are risks and dangers involved as well if you're not careful, and you kind of prioritize that over everything, and you kind of lose sight of some common sense and some review of, hang on, does this make sense? Is this the right thing for me to go at? You can be just more susceptible because of that drive to improve.
With a skilled guru, cult leader, whatever, they'll actually start to pre-answer some of your common sense questions. So prepare you before you say, hey, is this real? They've got you questioning yourself, and they've got you trusting them, or there's like a process to it. So when we look, and again, we use Diego only as a comparison point, but along the way, we might look and go, Diego's hanging upside down wearing a blindfold while some guy hits him. It looks ridiculous, but it doesn't start there. It starts with increments.
Yeah, 100%. It kind of does require you to kind of give yourself over, like give power over to that person a little bit, and full trust in them if you want. And to question things is to show a lack of trust, a lack of faith, a lack of belief, and that's not the right thing to do. That kind of stuff will get you in trouble. Of course, you should be able to question things. Like in jiu-jitsu class, I will question techniques to the almost too much sometimes, but I don't think there is a too much. It's a good thing to be able to do that. And if you have to just blindly follow, then you should have alarm bells ringing. And the other thing with these guru types, is whether they believe it themselves or not, I'm not sure, but they speak with such confidence, and in certain ways, there's certain words that they use that they've realized hit in certain ways, and it makes it sound more legit, and all these kind of things. Like, these are skilled at the art of guruism, which is separate to the actual skills of coaching. and I hate to be the guy who quotes Nietzsche, right? But there's one of my favorite quotes ever is, "Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies are." And someone who's such full of conviction can fool so many people. It happens all the time in many walks of life. And of course, definitely in this world of mixed martial arts that we love.
Well, it did happen to Diego. He does talk openly about it in our episode of Dark Side of the Cage. It's a fascinating conversation to hear him sort of look back at his life and talk about it. But thank you so much, Mullins. I'm going to bring you in next week to talk a little bit. There's some subjects about Evan Tanner that I think you can help us expand on. But thank you for this, my friend. How about a bonus chat? Rob from McDojo Life. All right. So jazzed to have my very dear friend, Rob from McDojo Life. Now, Rob, you specialize in debunking frauds. And actually, you tell us what you do.
Yeah, so basically I call out fakes, frauds, phonies, conmen, pedophiles, sex offenders, and cults in the martial arts industry, which is unfortunately a job that's needed, I guess. So I appear.
Yeah, if you call them and they will come, or whatever the story is. But it's you have what, 1 million followers across all platforms? I mean, there's a world of people who want to know about this.
Yeah, it's like 1.5 million and counting, but it's a living, I guess. I love my job, to be honest. It allows me to help a lot of people. It allows me to kind of get a little bit behind the scenes of some of the grittier side of the martial arts industry. And unfortunately, people tend to ignore that side because they want martial arts to be honor, integrity, respect, all that good stuff that we were grown up on in pop culture. But it's not always that, just like anything else. And so my job allows me to be able to kind of show the public that, hey, even though this is a fantastic thing for you, whatever the martial art is, it can also be something that you could be taken advantage of because it is an unregulated industry. And because of that, it's just right with nothing but people who are trying to take advantage of people who just don't know any better. And so it's nice to be able to be that person for those victims or potential victims to help them understand how to guide through this industry without being taken advantage of, to stand up for themselves, to speak for themselves.
Well, and you speak for a lot of them too, and you're doing a brilliant job. Besides, of course, you have a lot of people who love, there's entertaining aspects to people who are doing bullshit martial arts, but it's also very, very serious. Well, we'll touch on some of that. I bring you in today because you're a dear friend, but also because this episode of Dark Side of the Cage is called Diego Sanchez, the Fighter and the Guru. Now, Diego was a character, an individual, an eccentric, wonderful guy who is at top of the mountain martial artist. And even he was able to be, I don't know if the word is called, I don't know, there's a million terms we could use, but we, the viewer, saw him misled by somebody who, to the naked eye, didn't seem to be a real coach.
Yeah, he was conned. Obviously we're speaking about Joshua Fabia, and he is, I guess you could say, the term guru is a very appropriate term for someone who is definitely a cult leader. He runs a thing called the School of Self-Defense. I do believe off the top.
Self-awareness.
School of Self-Awareness. I'm sorry. I was close. But yeah, so he ran the School of Self-Awareness. And to my knowledge, the only training I really ever saw that he seemed to receive himself was Systema. From off the top of my head, it looked like maybe he did some Systema. But other than that, he was just a talker. He's one of those people that hits every checkbox when it comes to a cult leader. And when you look at somebody like Diego Sanchez, you used a very good term. Diego's a very eccentric, extremely kind person. He's been nothing but kind to me. When I had I think 5,000 followers, he would talk to me. He was very polite, always very cordial.
Wonderful guy.
He's just so nice. And eventually what I found out was apparently Joshua Fabia had taken control of all of his social media accounts, including an OnlyFans account, which is extremely odd and weird when you hear the commentary and stuff like that coming from Fabia. And obviously not something that Diego seemed to really want out there for the world to see. It was very odd situation, but anyone can be taken advantage of by a con artist. The hard part is convincing people they've been conned. Taking advantage of people is very easy because most of us on the planet, from at least from my job, from what I see, are nice, kind, good people 90% of the time, even if you make little mistakes here and there. But because of that, we're willing to project that kindness onto other people, even though they haven't earned the right to be called that. And so through martial arts, we give people titles like what we talked about earlier: virtues, honor, integrity, respect, discipline, just because they're good at beating people up. Well, that's a very low bar to give people those high honors and accolades when I can go to any prison on the planet and find a bunch of people who can beat people up who have none of those virtues.
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, martial arts at its best does lead to those things: integrity, respect, discipline, all of these at its best. That's what it does. But at its worst, you see some of its worst. I was the creative consultant on Dark Side of the Cage, and when we went and started to talk, and Diego was incredibly forthcoming in the episode, told us some of the stories and his own journey into these kind of sort of darker parts of his own adventure, as he talked about. But we needed to reach out to Joshua Fabia. Of course, we want him to be in the story, but also even legally, when people are talking about you, it's our job to reach out to him. And we reached out to him at the School of Self-Awareness and multiple different platforms, everywhere we could, and he never responded. Does that surprise you? As somebody who seemed to like attention, that when I reached out to him, not in any aggressive way, very inviting him to tell his story, that he never responded?
It doesn't surprise me. Like a lot of people online, when I post a video of a con artist or a fraud or a cult leader like Fabia, and I put Fabia in the box of cult leader. He was creating an ideology and a thought process around his belief structure and wanting people to belong into that, even though the outside was telling someone like Diego, which he was getting it from all sides at the time, hey, get away from this guy. He's not good. I mean, most people online are pretty brutal, but they were being so kind when they were like, hey, we're worried about you. And when you see stuff like that from the internet, it's probably time to take note, because most of the time it's just vitriol. But when someone's actually caring about you as a complete stranger, maybe take note. But a lot of these people want to continue the con. And one of the things that I see a lot on comment sections when I post frauds is people saying, well, why doesn't anybody just go beat them up? Well, first of all, other than that being extremely illegal, you can't just walk around and beat people up without you agreeing to some type of a match. But they don't want to pull back the curtain for people to see that they're a fraud. And when you actually have to go toe-to-toe with somebody who has the facts, what winds up happening is you run the risk of losing your cult following, because now you're going to be called out and create like a cognitive dissonance. And that's not really what you want from a follower. You don't want the follower to ever hit that fork in the road of cognitive dissonance where they go, I believed this really strongly, but now you're giving me an opposing view that completely is correct and is factual. You can prove that is correct, which makes this other ideology now false, which I've always believed. Well, now there's the fork in the road. Do I continue to believe what I always have because it's easy? And because I get to keep my friends and keep my social structure and keep my mentor? Or do I completely break down all of those walls for the truth?
And admit that I was led astray, and admit that I've gone down a crazy path.
Yeah, and so for a cult leader, it's their job to make sure that you don't hit that fork in the road. Mm-hmm. So by going forward and having these conversations with somebody who might call them out on something that's factual, they risk losing the ability to continue to be a cult leader. And that's Cult Leader Book 101, is make sure that you head off at the pass what other people outside of your cult are going to say about your cult. So that way, whenever it does come up, you always get the same term from a cult follower, which is my instructor, my guru, my leader, my priest, whoever it may be who's running the cult says, I knew you would say that. He told me you would say that.
I see. So now, Rob, after years of doing this, you deal with facts, things that you can prove. You're sort of, the only way you can do this so successfully is almost to be the opposite of that. You need provable, detailed facts all along. In fact, you've done this so many times, it is shocking. But up until recently, no one had ever even sued you because you were so bulletproof with the truth. Have you been sued ever? Cool. Tell us about it.
So I don't mind because we're already past, like, he's lost the lawsuit. We haven't even gone to the courtroom yet. He doesn't have a lawyer anymore. Like, his thing's crumbling. Plus, for anybody out there who wants to try to sue a reporter like myself, that's my job. You have to be aware of something called anti-SLAPP laws, which is if you frivolously sue a reporter and it's found to be a frivolous lawsuit, you actually have to pay back their lawyer's fees, which is where he is now with me. Because I do make sure that I handle things very factually and very fairly. I also try to reach out to each side. So if someone says, hey, this guy's done A, B, and C, I'll listen to them if they can provide me evidence. But I'm also going to reach out to the other side and be fair and allow them a chance to speak their mind, because in the martial arts industry, and really just in everywhere in general, one side obviously wants to win. Neither side truly seems to care about the truth. And as a reporter, your job is to show the truth and facts. And yes, this person's going to have a lot of opinions and ideologies and thought processes about why they hate that guy. And this person's going to say the same thing. I don't give a shit about either one of those things. What I care about is what can you prove and what's true. And if you can put those two things out there to the world, it's not up to me to tell people who's right and wrong, good and bad. People can make their own decisions about that. I don't even tell people, by the way, not to go train with these people. What I do is I show them the facts and I let them make their own educated decisions based off the facts that are there. So when you look at somebody like a Fabia, who takes somebody like Diego Sanchez, hangs him upside down from a metal pole, and punches and kicks him in his head, that's not good for you. We know that. We're plenty of evidence, right?
Yeah.
Somebody like Fabia, who runs around in a MMA cage chasing fighters with a knife, convincing fighters, saying the words, everything is a knife, which is actually a quote from him. Everything's not a knife, you crazy bastard. Like, you don't have a knife in an MMA fight. That's not physical. But unfortunately, he was able to convince people by standard cult leader practices. Just isolate somebody, give them a purpose that they feel is missing from their life, and act like you're the one who's going to be able to provide that and no one else. If you could do that, anyone can run a cult.
Yeah. Well, Rob, I get to spend a lot of time with you as a friend, and I know some of the things that you look at and shine light on, some dark shit. And we all thank you for
real
it.
Fast. I did go off on a slight tangent there for a second. The lawsuit, by the way, that we were discussing. Oh, yes. The guy who's suing me, he's suing me because he hired a registered sex offender. He knowingly did so. And he allowed that person to work around children. And then he tried to cover it up. And then when he finally got caught, he lied about it still on court documents. He said that I fired him when I found out. I removed him from the school when I found out. After I put the story out, a lady contacted me with a screenshot of a photo from her phone, which on an iPhone is timestamp, location stamp, and showed that instructor, that registered sex offender, was teaching a children's class over a year after this guy said that he found out. So
facts. Evidence.
They always win. So yeah, luckily I've only been sued once and I'm winning that. So I do try to make sure that I put the facts out.
There's plenty. Any future gurus, there is plenty of record of Rob and his McDojo Life universe, shining light on some of the darkest shit and doing it only with facts. And so whoever you are, nobody's going to try to sue you again because you're just so fact-based and so evidence-based. But again, you do look at some really dark shit. The rest of us, can be hopefully safer, because going to study, never mind when we're dealing with people who are offenders of the really deprived nature you're talking about. But even somebody going in and learning the wrong martial art can get you killed. And you're protecting a lot of people and making a few people laugh while you do it. And we really thank you, brother.
Oh, I appreciate your support, man. And like you said before, like I'm just happy that I have you as a friend, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on here and chit chat. And I love talking shop. I could do it all day.
Well, I am going to reach out to you for it's called Dark Side of the Cage. There's a lot of inspiration and a lot of beauty in these stories too, but there is some dark things. Episode 10 is about War Machine, and if I reach out to you to ask about that, please don't say no.
Oh, I absolutely would love to talk about that. That dynamic is a whole nother dynamic I have to deal with in this industry.
Okay, well, I will be talking to you about that, and I'm sure other stuff. Rob from McDojo Life, thank you, brother. I love you.
Appreciate you, brother. Love you too, man.
I already introduced you, but I'm going to do it again because you're my friend. You're the greatest ever. Mike Goldberg, thank you for hanging, man. It's so good to see you.
It is great to finally see you. I would much rather, and I hope it's very soon, see you in person. Mm-hmm. But this is a good start, my friend.
Yes, it is. Okay, so thank you for being part of Dark Side of the Cage for us. You, I don't know if people have seen the Diego episode yet, but you're all over that thing, and rightly so. You were right there when this kid came out of nowhere. Tell me what you remember when you first saw this Diego Sanchez kid.
Diego Sanchez, yoga in the rain. Boom, that's it. Mic drop, yoga in the rain.
Yeah.
That is what I thought of with Diego Sanchez. And Robin, it's fun to look back at some of the pictures from season 1. And Diego's in the full splits right in front of the whole crew of The Ultimate Fighter season 1. Diego was a beast. Diego came in as one of the most experienced guys. He had obviously been with, Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn for a very long time, being an Albuquerque guy. And I always teased Kenny Florian that Diego fought a very chubby Kenny Florian in the finals. And when I used to say Forrest Griffin, the original Ultimate Fighter winner, Diego would go, whoa, Goldie. Yeah. My fight was before that fight. So doesn't that make me the original Ultimate Fighter winner? And of course, who's going to argue with Diego Sanchez?
It's rude to correct Mike Goldberg, but maybe we'll let Diego Sanchez get away with it.
I'm also afraid of you, Robin, but Diego for sure.
When I was talking to Greg Jackson, I used the word weird, talking about Diego, who I love, and he used the word eccentric. But you from the time that you saw this guy, you knew he was a different cat, right?
And I can see why people would say weird, like Greg, but eccentric, a man who was the only man on the path in which he was, because he was different and he did do things differently. So it's funny because I know we're going to get to the part that is very much Zen, but you could see that there was a lot of spiritual belief and a lot of that energy behind Diego. Just like, all kidding aside, Robin, going back to yoga in the rain, Diego already was a mentally focused fighter who was as mean and talented as they come, because he could flip that switch and he truly was the nightmare. But eccentric, absolutely. A lot of eccentric people, you would say, are also weird. It's just if you feel like being a little bit nicer and kinder that day.
I'm going to go from yoga in the rain to, a guru hanging upside down, being hit with a blindfold on and the other weird stuff. But before I do, when you were sitting in that era, you and Rogan were sitting next to the cage, every night, every fight, every performance was probably wild, but there were some that jumped out different. And let me suggest that some of the Diego Sanchez fights were some of those. Oh,
absolutely. Diego and Clay Guida, forget about it. I mean, just, all out war, swinging head down, arms flying. Diego's walk-ins were epic with the mean face. And just his whole demeanor as he entered the combat zone, the octagon, and then worked his way into the cage. He was a man focused. And if you looked in those eyes and you didn't, I wouldn't say if you didn't know any better, if you looked in those eyes, you knew as his opponent, you better be ready.
Yeah.
Because he had a look that could tear through a lot of fighters in this world. And he fought with ferocity. He never left it in the octagon, if you would say, or left anything in the octagon. He always did everything he could to earn victories. And Diego was truly a nightmare and extremely talented on all levels.
With all honest due respect to the athletes today, the athletes are amazing. The fighters, the level, just what they're capable of is so high. But when we look at a series like we're doing here, and you've got Tanner, you've got Diego, Nick Diaz, they can't make them like that anymore, right? Like people like that actually can't probably navigate this modern professional landscape the way they could back then.
Well, Robin, and I would be remiss not to say thank you very much for hooking me up with Dark Side of the Cage and the great people at Vice. And we talked about that a lot. Every time I'd sit down to do an interview just in the room, we would talk about that all the time. That was a different era. And it was a different era because there were limited shows, but there were plenty of great fighters. So every card was amazing. I used to say all the time, because our production value was so high, that every time I went into a pay-per-view, I felt like I was calling the Super Bowl, because that was the atmosphere in which was created. Was, wow, this is the Super Bowl. And really, it's funny that the season finale of The Ultimate Fighter was in a smaller venue. And it was kind of like, hey, that's kind of the first time. Still felt important because we knew the contracts, but it was Super Bowl time. And there's no way that era can be replaced. There's so many great fighters. It's like any sport, Robin, you know that. Over 20 years, the athletes are going to evolve. The trainers are going to evolve, and the product will evolve. But will the names still carry as much weight? Will people still be as excited to watch today's champions as yesterday's champions? Some would say absolutely. And I believe many would say it'll never be the same as it was, much to your point, but as it was back then.
Yeah, it was a special time for sure. There was also this outsider element. Like, it was something that it was edgy and counterculture. It was a really magical time. When this episode is called actually Diego Sanchez, the Fighter and the Guru, because of course a part of his story, and he tells it, Diego sat down with us and told it. He ends up kind of, following a false prophet, as he later put it. What was your take as somebody who knew him and watched him when you saw that chapter unfold?
Well, you like the segue from earlier, don't you? That will eventually get to the Zen, and you slipped one question in between. So well done, my friend. Here was my initial thought: is Diego had suffered a setback or two, and Diego was truly one of Greg and Mike's originals. He was one of the true. It's like go way back to Team Quest when it was just Lindland and Couture and Chael, and I mean it was just those guys. It was Team Quest, Nate Corey. And you go early on, and you know that Diego grew up with Jackson Wink. I believe there became a time, and nobody was trying to hurt anybody, that other talent was starting to gravitate towards the great training that is provided in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the Jackson Wink MMA Academy. And all of a sudden, Diego felt like he wasn't the king of the lower weights anymore. He had to share time with the true gurus. He was not just the guy who walked in and everybody put on their pads, or everybody got their gi on or took their gi off and, oh, Diego's here, let's go. And that's nobody's fault. And I can understand how Diego all of a sudden, though, would be let down or feel let down, especially as emotional as Diego Sanchez has and will always be. Walk in, Zen man, upside down. And because of that mental spirit, I think Diego was, obviously we know he was tricked, but Diego found a guy who was going to make him the one and only thing that he worked on and worked with on every single day. And that's when he made the move. And that's when he kind of left Jackson Wink and went on this weird journey.
Well, I don't know. Some of the people watching this have seen the episode, and Diego really does, for his own reasons, sat down and told us the story, which is beautiful because it's not something he's talked that much about before. But what you're describing makes a lot of sense. You end up kind of as the one pupil of somebody that you believe can take you somewhere. But once you kind of sign over to that, you can go to some pretty wild places with a guru, false prophet, cult leader, whatever you want. And Diego really did. Were you kind of watching that unfold at the time?
Absolutely. And we were getting bits and pieces, yourself included. We were getting bits and pieces of it early on as the relationship kind of grew, unfortunately for Diego. And I remember more off the air, but I remember Joe telling me if it wasn't once, it was 25 times. This dude that Diego's with is crazy. He's a fraud. He doesn't know anything, and he's going to hurt Diego Sanchez. And Joe was absolutely right. And then as we saw more and more and more of it, there's press conferences where Ferreira he was answering more questions than Diego was. He was all of a sudden the voice. He wanted to be the focal point. Mm-hmm. And we all know that the greatest coaches and the greatest trainers in the world are the ones who always put their fighters first and always put their fighters in the spotlight. Mm-hmm. And if they get some credit along the way, they'll take it, but they'll never steal the mic from the man who actually, or woman who actually is getting into the competition in any sport. And we'll get more, I know, Robin, into the weird training and the different stuff that happened. But that was the thing that really stuck out with me early on is, you asked Diego a question in a presser and Diego doesn't even have a chance to address the question and give you an answer because Zen Man was already three sentences into his BS. And that was a real sign of this is not the way it's supposed to be in any sport, let alone in the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
Well, I'm happy to. I don't know how much you've been in touch with Diego or come across him in the recent times, but he seems to be doing really good. And he's a genuinely, as you know, sweet and kind and wonderful human being.
Absolutely, 100%. And I believe that's why there was a big part of the MMA world that was confused, and justifiably so. And that Diego had moved to San Diego. Diego, with fiance or married, and then that didn't work. I mean, there were a lot of different factors going on. And I think, unfortunately, Robin, at that point, people didn't see Diego as that sweet, caring person that you and I both know that he is. Mm-hmm. And he is emotional. So if something happens that hurts his feelings, he's man enough to show his reaction. If it's tears, if it's anger, whatever, he's man enough to say, this hurt. Like not, I'll work through it. No, he would say, this hurt. I depended on this person. I gave him or her everything I have. And now look what they are doing to me. And I've got a BYB on Saturday in Albuquerque. We're doing our open workouts on Thursday at Jackson Wink. Thank you for sharing Greg's number with me. I text him right away. He's like, I can't wait to see you, Goldie.
That's so good.
So I'm sure I'll get a chance to see Diego when I'm in Albuquerque. And I know the first thing we'll do is give each other a big hug. And I'll tell him I'm glad he's doing well. Because he was really in a bad place. And he was in a bad place when he went to that one person, and that one person took him right into the abyss.
It's true. Well, please give him a hug for me and enjoy Albuquerque. And lots of love, man. It's so great to see you. I'm going to circle back with you for the Ultimate Fighter episode because there was another one. You were sitting right cage side. I love you, man. Thank you so much.
Anytime, my friend.
All right. Thank you again for hanging out. Wonderful chats with three brilliant individuals. Diego Sanchez, the fighter and the guru. Make sure you check it out on Vice, Vice Sports, Vice TV, Crave in Canada. Just check it out. It's really great. We're very proud of this series, Dark Side of the Cage on Vice. Till next time, enjoy the hostilities, my friends.
Diego Sanchez destroyed everybody on The Ultimate Fighter.
After that, he was a certified MMA star.
Untamable.
It was a nightmare to fight him.
I was gonna do everything to be the best that I could.
Diego would bring in other coaches.
There's this guy, Joshua Fabia. That dude's a fraud.
The medicine was psilocybin.
Diego wasn't Diego anymore.
We were concerned about his safety.
Fabia was chasing them with a knife.
This guy was gonna kill me, or I was gonna have to kill him.
Dark Side of the Cage. New episode Wednesday at 10 on Vice.